The moment Nathan Dawson stepped through the door of his rented room above the general store in Fort Garland, Colorado, and saw the young woman with honey-colored hair standing on a chair reaching for one of his books, his entire world tilted sideways like a wagon with a broken axle. She wore a simple gray dress that had seen better days, and her hands trembled slightly as she tried to organize the scattered volumes that lined his makeshift shelf. "What in blazes are you doing?" he asked, his voice coming out rougher than intended after 3 weeks on the trail driving cattle north from Texas. She spun so fast she nearly lost her balance on the chair, and Nathan rushed forward instinctively to steady it. Her eyes were the color of spring grass after rain, wide with fear and something else he could not quite name. "I am so sorry, sir," she stammered, climbing down carefully. "Mr. Patterson from the general store said the room needed cleaning since you were expected back today. I found your books all scattered on the floor this morning. The window must have blown open during last night's storm. I was just trying to put them back properly." Nathan looked past her and saw that she was right. His window hung at an odd angle, and water stains marked the wooden floor beneath it. His precious books, the dozen or so volumes he had managed to collect over his 26 years, had clearly been exposed to the elements. Did any of them get damaged? He asked, his tone softening as he moved closer to inspect them. "Only one had water damage on the corner," she said quietly, pulling a copy of Shakespeare's sonnets from the shelf. "I dried it as best I could by the stove downstairs. Mr. Patterson said it would be fine." Nathan took the book from her hands and their fingers brushed for just a moment. A spark of something electric passed between them, and he saw her cheeks flush pink before she looked away. "You read Shakespeare?" he asked, genuinely curious now. "When I can," she admitted. "My father taught me to read before he died. He was a school teacher back in Pennsylvania before we came west. That was before the fever took him and my mother 4 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Nathan said, meaning it. "What is your name?" "Fiona Richards," she said, meeting his eyes again. "I work for Mr. Patterson doing cleaning and mending. He lets me sleep in the storage room in exchange for the work." Nathan studied her more carefully now. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, but there was a weariness in her eyes that spoke of hardship beyond her years. Her dress was clean but patched in several places, and her boots were worn thin at the soles. "You organized these by author," he observed, looking at the bookshelf. "Not everyone would know to do that." A small smile crossed her face, transforming her from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Books deserve respect. They are windows to worlds most of us will never see otherwise." Something shifted in Nathan's chest, a feeling he had not experienced since before the war had stolen his youth and innocence. He had spent the last 8 years working as a cowboy, saving every penny he could, reading whenever he had the chance, and trying to figure out what he wanted from life besides the next paycheck and the next town. "Thank you for taking care of them," he said finally. "Most folks around here think I am strange for carrying books in my saddlebags instead of extra ammunition." "Then most folks around here are fools," Fiona said with unexpected boldness, then immediately looked horrified at her own words. "I apologize. That was improper of me." Nathan laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even himself. "It was honest. I appreciate honesty more than propriety any day." A call came from downstairs, Mr. Patterson's gravelly voice summoning Fiona to help with something in the store. She excused herself quickly, smoothing her dress and hurrying toward the door. "Miss Richards," Nathan called after her, and she paused in the doorway. "Would you like to borrow one of those books, since you took such good care of them?" Her face lit up with such pure joy that Nathan felt his breath catch in his throat. Truly, you would trust me with one. I would, he said, surprised by how much he meant it. Pick whichever one interests you most. She hesitated for only a moment before crossing back to the shelf and selecting a worn copy of Jane Eyre. I will take the utmost care of it, I promise. I know you will, Nathan said softly. After she left, Nathan stood in his small room for a long time, listening to the sounds of the town outside his window. Fort Garland was not much to speak of, just a dusty Colorado town near the old fort that had once protected settlers from conflicts with the Utes. The war had ended 13 years ago in 1865, and the frontier was slowly becoming more civilized, though it still had rough edges everywhere you looked. He had been planning to stay in Fort Garland for only a few weeks before moving on to his next job. He had saved nearly enough money to buy his own small ranch, maybe somewhere in Montana where land was still affordable. But as he fixed his window and changed out of his trail-worn clothes, Nathan found himself thinking about green eyes and a smile that transformed a face, and wondering if maybe his plans could change. Over the next few days, Nathan found excuses to visit the general store more often than necessary. He bought supplies he did not really need, asked questions about local ranches that might be hiring, and pretended to browse the limited selection of goods while actually watching Fiona as she worked. She was efficient and graceful, despite the obvious physical toll of her labor. He watched her lift heavy boxes, sweep floors, and deal patiently with demanding customers who treated her like she was invisible. Several times he saw men speak to her in ways that made his hands clench into fists, their words dripping with disrespect simply because she was a young woman alone in the world with no family to protect her. On his fourth visit to the store, Mr. Patterson pulled him aside. The old man had shrewd eyes that missed nothing, and he gave Nathan a knowing look. You interested in that girl? Or are you just suddenly developing a powerful need for lamp oil and sewing needles? Patterson asked bluntly. Nathan felt heat creep up his neck. Is it that obvious? Only to anyone with working eyes, Patterson said, but his tone was not unkind. She is a good girl, works hard, never complains, but she has had a rough time of it since her folks passed. There have been men who tried to take advantage, thinking she had no one to look out for her. I do my best, but I am just her employer, not her kin. What are you telling me? Nathan asked carefully. I am telling you that if your intentions are not honorable, you should move along and leave her be. But if they are honorable, well, that girl could use someone decent in her corner. Lord knows she deserves some happiness after all she has been through. Nathan met the old man's eyes steadily. My intentions are honorable, sir. I give you my word on that. Patterson nodded slowly. Good. She is in the back room sorting fabric if you want to actually talk to her, instead of pretending to need more matches. Nathan found Fiona in the cramped storage room, surrounded by bolts of fabric in various colors. She was making notes in a ledger, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She looked up when his shadow fell across her work, and that brilliant smile appeared again. Mr. Dawson, she said, are you finding everything you need? I was hoping I might walk you home this evening, Nathan said, deciding that direct honesty was the best approach. If that would be acceptable to you. She blinked in surprise, and for a moment he thought she would refuse. Then her smile turned softer, almost shy. I would like that. Though I should warn you that home is just the storage room here, so the walk will not be very long. Then perhaps we could take the longer route, Nathan suggested. It is a pleasant evening for a walk. When the store closed that night, Nathan waited outside while Fiona finished her final tasks. She emerged wearing a shawl that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what the original pattern had been, but she wore it with dignity. They walked slowly through the dusty streets of Fort Garland as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Tell me about yourself," Fiona said as they walked. "Where are you from originally?" "Virginia," Nathan replied. "My father had a small farm near Richmond. I was 18 when the war started, and I enlisted like so many other fools who thought it would be a grand adventure. By the time it ended 4 years later, I had seen enough death and destruction for 10 lifetimes. When I got home, my parents had both died of illness, and the farm had been seized for unpaid taxes. I had nothing left there, so I came west looking for a fresh start." "That must have been terribly difficult," Fiona said softly. "Losing everything like that." "It was," Nathan admitted. "But it also freed me in a way. I had no ties, no obligations. I could go anywhere and be anyone. I worked cattle drives, hired on at various ranches, learned everything I could about horses and cattle and land. I have been saving money for years now, hoping to buy my own place someday." "That sounds like a good dream," Fiona said. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Nathan found himself acutely aware of how close she was, how the evening breeze played with the loose strands of her hair. He wanted to know everything about her, wanted to hear her thoughts on books and life and what she hoped for in her future. "What about you?" he asked. "What are your dreams?" Fiona laughed, but it was a sad sound. "Dreams are for people who have the luxury of choices. I dream of having enough to eat every day and a warm place to sleep at night. Beyond that, I try not to hope for too much." "Hope can be a dangerous thing when you have as little as I do." Her words struck Nathan like a physical blow. Here was a woman who was clearly intelligent and kind, who loved books and had been educated by her father, and she had been reduced to simply hoping for basic survival. It seemed profoundly unjust. "What if you could dream bigger?" he pressed. "What would you want?" She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I would want a home. Not just a place to sleep, but a real home with a garden and maybe some chickens. I would want books, shelves and shelves of them. I would want to feel safe, to not have to worry every day about whether I will have work the next week or whether some man will decide I am fair game because I have no protection. And I would want someone to share it with, someone who sees me as more than just a burden or a convenience." Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her. The vulnerability in her expression made his chest ache. "You deserve all of that and more, Fiona Richards. Any man would be lucky to build that life with you." "You barely know me," she said, but there was hope flickering in her green eyes now. "I know you respect books. I know you work hard. I know you are kind even when others are not kind to you. I know you have survived losses that would have broken weaker people. That tells me plenty about your character," Nathan said firmly. They resumed walking, but something had shifted between them. By the time they reached the back door of the general store, Nathan knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to know this woman better, wanted to be the person who helped make her dreams come true. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow?" he asked. "There is a boarding house that serves meals. Nothing fancy, but the food is decent." "I would like that very much," Fiona said, and her smile could have lit up the darkening street. Nathan walked back to his room that night with his heart lighter than it had been in years. He lay awake for hours, thinking about honey-colored hair and green eyes and a woman who organized books by author, and dreamed of having a garden. The next few weeks passed in a blur of dinners and walks and long conversations. Nathan learned that Fiona had a quick wit and a sharp mind that had been starved for intellectual stimulation. She devoured every book he loaned her and always had thoughtful observations about what she had read. They discussed Shakespeare and Dickens, talked about philosophy and poetry, and debated the merits of various novels, but they also talked about simpler things. Fiona told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her father's patient teaching and her mother's gentle nature. She spoke of the journey west that had been full of hope, until fever had swept through their wagon train. Nathan shared stories of his own youth, carefully editing out the worst of what he had seen during the war. He found work at a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, breaking horses for a rancher named McAllister. The pay was good, and it allowed him to stay in Fort Garland longer than he had originally planned. Every evening after work, he rode into town to see Fiona. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they sat on the steps behind the general store and talked while the stars came out. And sometimes he simply watched her work, content just to be in her presence. Mr. Patterson watched their courtship with approval, though he warned Nathan that people in town were starting to talk. In a place like Fort Garland, a young woman spending so much time with a cowboy was bound to raise eyebrows and invite speculation. Nathan knew the old man was right to be concerned about Fiona's reputation, but he also knew his intentions were completely serious. 2 months after he had first found her arranging his bookshelf, Nathan rode into town with a plan that had been forming in his mind for weeks. He had been doing calculations, counting and recounting his savings, and considering what he could afford. It was time to make his intentions clear, not just to Fiona but to himself. He found her in the general store as usual, this time helping a customer select fabric for a dress. She looked up when he entered, and her face brightened in a way that made his heart skip beats. When the customer left, he approached the counter where she stood. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said, keeping his voice low so Patterson would not overhear from the back room where he was taking inventory. Concern flickered across her face. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. But I have been thinking a lot about the future lately, about what I want and where I want to be. And I have realized that all my plans, everything I have been working toward for the past 8 years, it all feels empty if you are not part of it." Fiona's eyes widened and her hand came up to her throat. "Nathan, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I am in love with you, Fiona. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you on that chair trying to save my books from water damage. I love your intelligence and your strength and your kindness. I love the way you see the world and the way you have survived everything life has thrown at you without becoming bitter. I love everything about you." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she was gripping the edge of the counter as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, afraid that if I spoke the words out loud, somehow everything would disappear like a dream." Nathan reached across the counter and took both of her hands in his. "This is not a dream. This is real, and I want to build a life with you. I have enough saved to buy a small piece of land. It would not be much at first, maybe just a cabin and enough acreage for some cattle and horses. But it would be ours, and we could build it into something more over time. I want to give you that home you dreamed about, with the garden and the chickens and all the books we can collect. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to make sure you never have to worry about having enough to eat or a safe place to sleep ever again. Are you asking me to marry you?" Fiona whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "I am," Nathan said firmly. "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I am 34 years old and I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me, Fiona Richards?" "Yes," she said immediately, and then louder, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Nathan came around the counter and pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she cried happy tears into his chest. Mr. Patterson chose that moment to emerge from the back room, took one look at the scene before him, and grinned widely. "About time," the old man said gruffly. "I was beginning to think you would dance around each other forever. I suppose this means I need to find a new helper." "I am sorry to leave you in a difficult position," Fiona said, pulling away from Nathan just enough to look at her employer. "Nonsense," Patterson said. "You have earned your happiness, girl. Besides, my sister's daughter has been looking for work. She can take over your duties. You just focus on building that life you deserve." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Nathan found a piece of land about 8 miles from Fort Garland, a beautiful spot with a creek running through it and good grazing land. It was only 40 acres, but the price was right, and the location was perfect. He used almost all of his savings to purchase it, leaving just enough to buy lumber and supplies for a cabin. They were married in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Garland on a crisp October morning in 1878. Fiona wore a dress that one of the local women had helped her sew from fabric that Mr. Patterson had given her as a wedding gift. Nathan wore his best clothes, which were not fancy but were clean and mended. Mr. Patterson stood as witness, along with McAllister from the ranch where Nathan had been working. After the ceremony, they rode out to their land in a wagon loaded with supplies. Nathan had been working on the cabin for the past 3 weeks, getting it to a point where it would at least be weatherproof before winter set in. It was small, just 2 rooms, but he had built it sturdy and solid. He had also started work on a small barn for the horses. When they arrived, Nathan lifted Fiona down from the wagon and then, following tradition, scooped her up into his arms to carry her across the threshold. She laughed with pure joy, her arms around his neck, and Nathan felt a sense of rightness settle into his bones. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson," he said softly, setting her down gently inside. The cabin was sparse, but Fiona looked around with wonder as if she was seeing a palace. Nathan had built a fireplace that took up most of one wall, and he had constructed shelves along another wall specifically for their books. There was a simple bed frame that he had made himself, a table with 2 chairs and hooks on the walls for hanging clothes and tools. It was not much, but it was theirs. "It is perfect," Fiona breathed, turning in a slow circle. "Nathan, it is absolutely perfect." That night, they lay together in their bed, wrapped in quilts to ward off the autumn chill. Through the window, they could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Nathan held Fiona close, marveling at how his life had changed so completely in such a short time. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream," Fiona murmured against his chest. "If it is a dream, then we are both having it," Nathan replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I never want to wake up." The winter that followed was hard but happy. They worked together every day to make their homestead functional. Nathan finished the barn and bought 2 horses and a milk cow. Fiona started a garden area, preparing the soil for spring planting. They cut firewood until their hands were blistered, and they chinked every gap in the cabin walls to keep out the brutal Colorado winds. Money was tight, sometimes desperately so. There were days when they ate nothing but beans and cornbread, and nights when they piled every blanket they owned on the bed and still shivered from the cold. But through it all, they had each other, and that made even the hardest days bearable. In the evenings, after the work was done, and they had eaten their simple meal, they would sit by the fire and read to each other from their small collection of books. Nathan would hold Fiona in his arms, and one of them would read aloud while the other listened. Sometimes they would discuss what they had read, and sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, content to be together. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Fiona planted her garden with seeds they had carefully saved money to buy, and Nathan rode to nearby ranches looking for work breaking horses. He was good with horses, patient and firm, and word spread quickly. Soon he had more work than he could handle, which meant actual money coming in regularly. By summer, their garden was flourishing. Fiona had a green thumb that matched her green eyes, and she coaxed vegetables from the earth with what seemed like magic. She also proved to be an excellent cook, able to make delicious meals from the simplest ingredients. Nathan came in from working with the horses each evening to find their cabin filled with the smells of baking bread or simmering stew, and he felt like the luckiest man in Colorado. They made friends among their neighbors, though the nearest homestead was still 3 miles away. Once a month, they would make the trip into Fort Garland for supplies and to catch up on town news. Mr. Patterson always greeted them warmly and insisted on giving them a discount on goods, which he claimed was partial back payment for all the times Fiona had worked extra hours without complaint. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch Nathan had just finished building, watching the sun set over their land, Fiona turned to him with a particular glow in her cheeks. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, I am almost certain of it." Nathan felt everything inside him go still and then explode with joy. A baby. They were going to have a child. He pulled Fiona into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there. I think the baby will come in late winter or early spring," she said, and he could hear the happiness and fear mixed in her voice. "We need to get you to a doctor in town to make certain everything is fine," Nathan said immediately, his mind already racing through what they would need to do to prepare. "And we will need to add on to the cabin. The baby will need a room. And we should get more supplies stored up before winter in case you need to rest." And Fiona laughed and put her fingers over his lips to stop the flow of words. "We have time, Nathan. The baby will not be here for months yet. We will prepare together, just like we do everything else." True to her word, they spent the fall preparing for the baby's arrival. Nathan built an addition onto the cabin, creating a small bedroom that could serve as a nursery. Fiona sewed baby clothes from scraps of fabric and knitted tiny blankets in the evenings. They saved every penny they could, knowing that a doctor would need to be paid when the time came. Fiona's pregnancy was not easy. She was often sick in the mornings, and as winter approached, she grew tired quickly. Nathan tried to take on more of her usual chores, but she was stubborn about continuing to do her share of the work. They argued about it more than once until finally, Nathan sat her down and explained that letting him help was not a sign of weakness, but a way of letting him care for her and their child. "I know you are strong enough to do everything yourself," he said, holding both her hands in his. "You have been doing everything yourself for years, but you do not have to anymore. You have me now, and I need you to let me take care of you, please." Tears had filled her eyes at his words, and she had nodded. After that, she allowed him to do more without protest, though he could tell it went against her independent nature. Winter came early and hard that year. By December, snow was piled high around their cabin, and the temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the bucket by the door. Nathan worked tirelessly to keep them supplied with firewood and to make sure the animals were cared for. There were days when the wind howled so fiercely that going outside was dangerous, and they were trapped in the cabin together. But even trapped indoors, they were happy. Nathan would read to Fiona while she knitted, or they would talk about names for the baby and what kind of life they hoped to give their child. They spoke of building a bigger house someday, of buying more land, of sending their children to school so they could have the education Fiona had been lucky enough to receive. "I want our children to have choices," Fiona said one night as they lay in bed, her swollen belly pressed against Nathan's side. "I want them to be able to dream big dreams and have a real chance at making those dreams come true." "They will," Nathan promised. "We will make sure of it." In late February, Fiona's labor began in the middle of the night. Nathan woke to find her gripping his arm, her face pale and strained. He had been dreading this moment, knowing that the nearest doctor was 8 miles away and the roads were still difficult with snow. "I need you to stay calm," Fiona said through gritted teeth, and Nathan almost laughed at the absurdity of her trying to comfort him when she was the one in labor. "I am calm," he lied, already pulling on his clothes. "I am going to ride to the Johnsons' place. Mary Johnson has helped birth babies before. She will know what to do." "There is not time," Fiona gasped, another contraction clearly hitting her. "The pains are close together. This baby is coming soon." Nathan felt panic rise in his throat, but he forced it down. Fiona needed him to be strong right now. He built up the fire until the cabin was warm, boiled water like he had heard was necessary, and gathered clean cloths. Then he sat beside Fiona and held her hand, offering whatever comfort and encouragement he could. The labor was long and difficult. Fiona was in pain for hours, and there were moments when Nathan was terrified he would lose her. He prayed harder than he had ever prayed in his life, making bargains with God and begging for her to be all right. As dawn broke, filling their cabin with gray light, their son was born. Nathan caught the baby in his shaking hands, and the child let out a strong, angry cry that was the most beautiful sound Nathan had ever heard. Fiona collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but smiling. "A boy," she whispered. "We have a son." Nathan carefully cleaned the baby and wrapped him in one of the blankets Fiona had made, then placed him in her arms. Mother and child looked at each other, and Nathan felt his heart expand, so much he thought it might burst from his chest. "He is perfect," Nathan said, running a gentle finger down the baby's soft cheek. "You are perfect. You are the strongest, most amazing woman in the world." They named him Thomas, after Fiona's father. Little Thomas proved to be a healthy baby with strong lungs and his mother's green eyes. The first few weeks were exhausting as they adjusted to having an infant in the house. But Nathan had never been happier. He would watch Fiona nursing their son, her face soft with love, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built together. Spring came, bringing warmer weather and new life to their homestead. Fiona slowly regained her strength, and Nathan divided his time between working with horses and helping care for Thomas. The baby grew quickly, becoming more alert and responsive with each passing week. As the years passed, their homestead grew and prospered. Nathan's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the region, and he had steady work. They saved their money carefully and bought more land when they could afford it. Fiona's garden expanded year by year, and she began selling vegetables and preserves in town, bringing in additional income. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, and listened with rapt attention when his mother read to him in the evenings. When he was 3, Fiona became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born in the autumn of 1882, it was with Mary Johnson present to help. They named her Caroline, and she had her father's dark hair and a smile that could charm anyone. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named Michael. Their cabin, which had once seemed adequate, was now bursting at the seams with 3 growing children. Nathan spent an entire summer building a proper house, a sturdy 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a parlor that had built-in bookshelves along an entire wall. The day they moved in, Fiona cried happy tears as she arranged their growing collection of books on those shelves. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked Nathan that evening as they stood together in their new parlor, watching their children play on the floor. "Every detail," Nathan said, pulling her close. "You were standing on a chair in my room trying to save my books from water damage. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was terrified you would be angry with me for being in your room," Fiona admitted. "But then you were kind, and you offered to let me borrow a book. That was the moment I started falling in love with you, I think." Anyone who would trust a stranger with something so precious had to have a good heart. "Best decision I ever made," Nathan said, kissing her temple. "Well, that and asking you to marry me." "And what about agreeing to arrange your future around me?" Fiona teased. "Was that a good decision?" "The best decision," Nathan said seriously. "I found you arranging my bookshelf, and in doing so, you arranged everything else in my life into its proper place. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a reason to build something that would last." Their children grew up surrounded by books and love, learning to work hard but also to dream. Nathan and Fiona were strict about education, making sure each child could read and write well. They encouraged questions and curiosity, and their dinner table was often filled with lively discussions about everything from ranch management to philosophy. Thomas proved to have his father's way with horses and his mother's love of learning. By the time he was 14, he was already helping Nathan train horses and talking about maybe going to college someday to study veterinary medicine. Caroline was gentle and creative, always drawing pictures or making up stories. Michael was the adventurous one, constantly getting into mischief, but with such charm that it was hard to stay angry with him. In 1890, when Thomas was 12, Caroline was 8, and Michael was 6, Nathan and Fiona received word that Mr. Patterson had passed away in his sleep. They made the journey to Fort Garland for the funeral, bringing all 3 children with them. As they stood beside the grave, Nathan thought about how much the old man had meant to both of them, how he had protected Fiona when she had no one else, and had given his blessing to their courtship. "He was a good man," Fiona said quietly, holding Nathan's hand. "He helped me survive when I had nothing. I will never forget his kindness." After the funeral, they visited the general store one last time. Patterson's niece had taken it over, and she greeted them warmly. As they looked around the store, so much the same as it had been all those years ago, Nathan felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. "This is where it all started," he said to Fiona. "This is where I kept finding excuses to buy things I did not need just so I could see you." She laughed, that same bright laugh that had captured his heart years before. "I knew what you were doing. I thought it was sweet." "Why did you never say anything?" Nathan asked. "Because I was afraid if I acknowledged it, you would stop coming," Fiona admitted. "Those visits were the best part of my days. I looked forward to them desperately." They returned home to their ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Their children ran ahead to check on the animals, and Nathan and Fiona walked slowly, hand in hand, taking in the sight of everything they had built together. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were harsh winters and dry summers, years when money was tight and years when they prospered. There were illnesses and injuries, moments of fear and moments of pure joy. Through it all, Nathan and Fiona faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each passing year. Thomas did eventually go to college, the first in their family to do so. He studied veterinary medicine in Denver and returned to the area to set up a practice, treating animals for ranchers throughout southern Colorado. He married a sensible young woman named Sarah, who shared his love of animals and his practical nature. Caroline discovered a talent for teaching and became the schoolteacher in Fort Garland, following in her grandfather's footsteps, though she had never known him. She married a banker named Joseph, and they built a comfortable life in town. Michael, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years working as a ranch hand throughout the West, before finally settling down on a piece of land adjacent to his parents' ranch with his wife, a spirited woman named Rebecca. Nathan and Fiona became grandparents multiple times over, and their house was often filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing and laughing. They added on to the house again, creating more bedrooms for when family came to visit. Their bookshelf continued to grow, filled now with volumes their children had given them over the years. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, their children threw them a party that brought together friends and neighbors from throughout the region. Nathan looked around at the gathering, at the life they had created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, coming to stand beside him. She was 47 now, with silver threading through her honey-colored hair, but to Nathan, she was just as beautiful as she had been at 23. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that there was a storm that night, and that my window blew open, and that you cared enough about books to try to save them," Nathan said, pulling her into his arms for a dance as someone started playing a fiddle. "That was fate," Fiona said, resting her head against his shoulder as they swayed to the music. "We were always meant to find each other." "I believe you are right," Nathan agreed. "I spent years wandering, thinking I was looking for land or money or success. But what I was really looking for was you. I just did not know it until I found you standing on a chair in my room, organizing my books by author. And I had given up on hoping for anything more than survival," Fiona said softly. "Then you walked in and showed me that dreams could actually come true if you had the courage to reach for them." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by their family and friends, celebrating a love that had started with books and had grown into a legacy that would extend for generations. As the years advanced into their 60s and then 70s, Nathan and Fiona gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Michael, who had proven to be an excellent rancher. They spent their days in quieter pursuits, working in the garden, raiding, and enjoying their grandchildren. Nathan's hair turned completely white, and he moved a bit slower, but his mind remained sharp. Fiona developed arthritis in her hands that made fine work difficult, but she continued to read voraciously and to tend her beloved garden. In 1915, as the world beyond their peaceful corner of Colorado descended into global conflict, Nathan and Fiona celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with their children and grandchildren around them. They had 9 grandchildren by then, ranging in age from 20 to 3, and another one was on the way. "I never imagined life could be this full," Fiona said that evening as she and Nathan sat on the porch, watching the sun set as they had done thousands of times before. "When I was 23 and cleaning the general store for room and board, if someone had told me I would someday have all this, I never would have believed them." "You deserved all of it," Nathan said firmly, taking her weathered hand in his. "You deserved happiness and security and love." "I am just grateful I got to be the one to give it to you." "We gave it to each other," Fiona corrected gently. "You were lost too, Nathan. You were wandering without a real home or purpose. We found each other and we built this life together." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and the stars emerged. From inside the house came the sounds of their family cleaning up after dinner, their voices mingling in conversation and laughter. Nathan thought about the long journey that had brought him to this moment, from the battlefields of Virginia to the cattle drives of Texas to a rented room above a general store in Fort Garland, Colorado. "I would not change a single thing," Nathan said quietly. "Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it because it led me to you." "Even the war?" Fiona asked softly. She knew his history, knew the nightmares he still sometimes had about things he had witnessed. "Even that," Nathan said after a moment. "Because without the war, I never would have come west. I would have stayed in Virginia and lived a completely different life. A life that would not have included you or our children or any of this. So yes, I would endure it all again if it meant ending up here with you." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars together. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful that would outlast them both. Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1917, just short of his 65th birthday. He died in the house he had built, in the bed he had shared with Fiona for nearly 40 years, surrounded by books and family and love. Fiona held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though her heart broke, she also felt gratitude for every moment they had shared. She lived another 6 years, spending her final days in the house filled with memories, cared for by her devoted children and grandchildren. She read constantly, revisiting favorite books and discovering new ones. She worked in her garden until she physically could not anymore, and she told stories to anyone who would listen about the cowboy, who had found her arranging his bookshelf and had arranged his entire future around her. On a warm summer afternoon in 1923, Fiona passed away in the same bed where Nathan had died. Her children gathered around her. Her last words were, "Tell your father I am coming home." They buried her next to Nathan on a hill overlooking their ranch, and their headstones simply read, "Nathan and Fiona Dawson. Together in this life and the next." Their children ensured that the ranch stayed in the family, passing it down through the generations. The house Nathan built still stands, expanded and improved over the years but retaining its original structure. The bookshelf he built into the parlor wall remains, still filled with volumes, including the original books that had been scattered by a storm one fateful night in 1878. Family tradition says that every Dawson child must learn the story of how Nathan found Fiona arranging his books, and how that simple moment of caring for something precious had led to a love that had built a dynasty. The story has been told and retold through the generations, growing perhaps slightly more romanticized with each telling, but never losing its essential truth. Thomas's great-great-grandson still runs cattle on an expanded version of the original ranch. Caroline's descendants include teachers, doctors, and community leaders throughout Colorado. Michael's line produced artists, adventurers, and innovators who carried the spirit of their ancestors into new frontiers. But it all started with books scattered by a storm, a young woman who cared enough to organize them properly, and a cowboy who was smart enough to recognize that he had found something infinitely more valuable than land or money or success. He had found love, and he had been wise enough to arrange his entire life around it, building a future that extended far beyond anything he could have imagined that day in Fort Garland, when he stepped into his room and found his destiny standing on a chair, trying to save his books from water damage. The books themselves, those original volumes that Nathan had carried in his saddlebags through years of wandering, were carefully preserved by the family. They sit in a place of honor on those original shelves, their pages yellowed with age, some still showing the faint marks of water damage from that long-ago storm. Visitors to the ranch are told their significance, how these simple objects had been the catalyst for everything that followed. On quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across the Colorado plains, some family members swear they can hear the echoes of laughter from the porch and see two figures sitting together watching the sunset, holding hands as they had done for so many years. Whether it is actually the spirits of Nathan and Fiona, or simply the power of a love story so strong that it has seeped into the very foundation of the place they built together, no one can say for certain. What is certain is that in a time and place where life was harsh and often short, where survival was never guaranteed and happiness was a luxury many could not afford, two people found each other and built something that lasted. They took broken pieces, a war-damaged soldier without a home, an orphaned young woman with nothing but her intelligence and determination, and created something whole and beautiful that enriched not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. Their legacy is more than land or money, or even the large family that descended from them. Their legacy is the proof that love, real love that is built on respect and partnership and shared values, can overcome any obstacle. That two people who were willing to see each other clearly, to appreciate each other's worth, and to work together toward common dreams could create something that would outlast them by generations. The story of how he found her arranging his bookshelf, and how the cowboy arranged his future around her, became the foundation story of the entire family, the mythic beginning that shaped how they saw themselves and the world. It taught them that small moments of kindness matter, that caring for things that others might dismiss as unimportant reveals character, and that love requires both the courage to be vulnerable and the wisdom to choose the right person with whom to build a life. In the end, Nathan and Fiona's story was not unusual because extraordinary things happened to them, but because they took ordinary things, books, a small piece of land, daily work, and the choice to love each other faithfully and turned them into something extraordinary through commitment and care. They showed that happiness does not require grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but rather the willingness to build something together, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. And so the story continues to be told, passed down through the generations, adapted for new times but never losing its essential truth. Because some stories are too important to forget, and some loves are too powerful to be diminished by time. Nathan and Fiona Dawson built more than a ranch in Colorado. They built a love story for the ages, one that started with scattered books and a woman kind enough to arrange them properly, and a man wise enough to see that she was arranging far more than just his bookshelf. She was arranging the course of his entire life, setting it on a path that would lead to more happiness and fulfillment than he had ever imagined possible.